I'm one of those people that doesn't notice, even though it's in my work, it's in the comics I make, and I'm always told, oh, I like this story because it reminds me of this desert and this and that, and I was like, oh, yeah, okay, they have to bring it to my attention, but otherwise, yeah, I think it does. I like the calmness. It was a little strange because they have to import trees here, or at least when they were building it up where I live, and there was no birds. And so my sister would come. She goes, "There's no birds. It's driving me crazy," And the street that's behind us wasn't so busy then, so we never heard traffic. We never heard anything except weird noises beyond the mountains. Area 51,
There's a sense of that in Los Angeles to some degree. You've got like Chinatown, the movie Chinatown, the aqueduct, all of that. The idea that there was they were kind of basically trying to build up this desert in the middle of nowhere, but I think that's even more so the case in Las Vegas. There's just really, I spent a little time in Pahrump for a work-related thing, but there's nothing. It's just such a strange anomaly that kind of exists alone in the desert.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just I just kind of, I guess I needed the change. So I liked the quiet, and we went through a whole period of having rotten neighbors, because a lot of people are just moving from different places and they're bringing their kids because they were kicked out of where they were because their kids were so rotten. And we had some rotten neighbors next to us, but that was a phase, oddly enough. Like for 10 years we haven't. It's been really nice, but we went through a period of like people would move in and go, no wonder they moved here. They're running away from the law. They're running away from civilized people.
There actually is a phenomenon too of people who go to Vegas for strip related reasons and just kind of get stuck, like monetarily, financially, just kind of end up unable financially to leave the city. It sounds like
sometimes, yeah. At a lot of downtown, there's a lot of motels with just gamblers, just basically, gambling their lives away. It's weird. It's not me. I luckily I don't have that addiction. So
ironically, it's a bad place to live if you do have that addiction. Because it's everywhere.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's easy to do. Just walk up to a table.
You were kind of ahead of the curve, I think, in being able to work remotely. A lot of us are just sort of adjusting to this right now. But does your location have any impact? It seems like you're probably able to essentially do what you do from anywhere.
Yeah, that was always been the thing about being a cartoonist. I can live anywhere, do the exact same thing. I expected to change, maybe Vegas would influence me as far as what I was drawing, but no, it's the same stuff that I grew up with in Southern California. I still draw the same comics, same type stories.
There's a fair amount of diversity in what you do in terms of art styles and storytelling. There are cartoonists that you came up with who really kind of hit their stride, in much the same way that I think a lot of musicians tend to have their most creative periods, in their 20s and kind of get locked in that style. But you do strike me as somebody who has continued to push his own boundaries and explore new things thematically and stylistically.
It always seems the same to me. People have to, like I said, tell me, "Wow, where were you going with that?" Where I was like, "Going with what?" What? Yeah. I try to push. Well, I try to push myself as just trying to be a good cartoonist. Just to keep things interesting. It's been a long time. It's almost 40 years, Well, anyway, what happens to a lot of cartoonists who last that long, they just get into a rut and just keep, stay in the comfort zone. I'm definitely there a lot of the times, but I do want to make things interesting down the line.
I suspect that one of the nice things about the way you position your career is you do have this huge world that you've been building that you can always go back and revisit, but you don't live in Palomar all the time.
No, that I did for, how many years? 15 years, I guess it was. And then I started to jump back and forth just because at the time Palomar just became, I don't want to say restrictive because it wasn't. I could do whatever I want, but I didn't want to get into the fantasy thing of like, oh, this is a dream story, or this is because I like drawing all kinds of different things, and they just didn't apply to Palomar all the time. So I decided to have Palomar there part of the time, and then the rest of the time, other places, even if I'm using the same characters.
I have a Hypnotwist in front of me. If you wanted to do something like that, the only way it could sort of tangentially live within the Palomar universe is if somebody falls asleep and basically lives through this as a dream.
Right. So I decided to do the movie thing because that's what the Hypnotist is, and the flip book is Scarlet by Starlight. These are films. I use the excuse of of saying, well, these are edited versions of the movies because they're obviously not as long as movies. I used one of the characters linked to the Palomar characters to become an actress to focus on these stories. They were originally just supposed to be for Love and Rockets, 16-page, edited, adaptations of movies. But I got ambitious because at the time when I started them, I realized I hadn't done a graphic novel. I hadn't done, because that was the thing to do. Like, you're a good artist, you do a graphic novel. Well, I found out that that's not tougher than it sounds. Even well, because when you serialize, you can make mistakes along the way, and then when you collect it, or when by the time you get back, you can fix those things. When you write everything all for 200 pages or whatever it is, and then you get to it, you find that there's so many things you want to change. You can do that, but it's hard when you already know what the ending is, if you do know what the ending is. So anyway, I just found that it was a lot better to serialized. If you look at all the acclaimed graphic novels, they're all most of them are serialized. You got Watchmen, Mouse, all that stuff.
There are a lot of other pragmatic reasons to serialize them as well. I mean, one of them is probably just it's steadier work to, I assume, to release these in serial form. And then the other being that, I talk to like Craig Thompson, right? He just like works on this 500-page book and basically just disappears out from the world. This is an opportunity to continue to exist in the world.
I grew up, I mean, this is a large factor. I grew up with comic books, right? They came out every month. Even with the thinking of inflation, they were pretty cheap, to buy. When I was a kid, they were 12 cents, and then they were 25, and then 20, 30. The prices kept going up really fast, but that's still change, and so you can enjoy really, I think about the real comic books that influenced so many, like say Marvel comics in the mid 60s. Those are 12-cent comics. And to think about what they've built on that, especially the movie industry. This was just because they only had themselves to worry about if it was good or not. It was up to Stan Lee to edit it and the artist to be that good. So I love knowing that growing up, I thought, well, I can do that too. I probably won't make the impact they did, but I can make comics that I want to make, but they have to be like comics, have to be short. I need them to be coming out all the time. And so when we did Love and Rockets as a book for a couple of years, that worked for stories, but it was hard on us to maintain that kind of grilling, activity.
So you do sort of contextualize these as being, I guess, short films is the way you put it. And the Marvel example is an interesting one because there was certainly a period, this is still the case to some degree, but there was a period there, especially in the 2000s, where it seemed like a substantial portion of the comics industry basically existed as an IP factory, as an opportunity for people to get their screenplays out there.
All right.
When indie comics were really sort of at their height, did you ever see an opportunity to potentially cash in on this?
Heck yeah. Well, actually, we've since after a few years after Love and Rockets started, we've been asked to develop things for film. But see, this was the '80s, so people just didn't know what to do with it. It was in a comic book, we can get away with it because nobody could tell us not to do it. Well, when you get in that business, there's plenty of people telling you not to do it. Do they have to be Hispanic? Does it have to be this? Does it? Well, my story of Palomar, it's about a small Latin American town with surreal elements. Where's the rockets? It's called Love and Rockets. Where's the rockets? I go, they're they're rockets that aren't really there. It just means, and you can't explain that to a Hollywood person, money person. They're just like, what? Give me the meat. Give me what people want. Why people want to see this? You couldn't explain that to them in the 80s, and then in the 90s, they kept trying it. So we've just basically ended up with people that didn't know what to do with it, and I understand that. Streaming's different now. Things are different now. There's much more things that they can do, and so there actually is some serious interest in doing some comics from Palomar to get them on streaming, but still talks.
Even at the height of you being asked to do some of this stuff, you never were tempted to soften it to
to manipulate it,
or just generally to make it more accessible for a wider audience.
No, because personally, I don't know how to do that. I wouldn't know how to do it. I only know how to make stories the way I make them. I mean, a lot of people have seen. I've done mainstream comics. I've done extra comics. I didn't think they were as effective as my Palomar work, my personal work. So that's just where I am. I'm better at doing that. But there just wasn't anything. I hate to say it. There was nothing to sell because at the time, comic book toys, comic book, So it was, no, there was nothing to sell. There's nothing to really. The entertainment world wasn't ready for it. Just anyway. So as all our peers got option money, we never did. We never got option money for our work.
I have certainly experienced in my own life. It's like, it's hard to see your peers be successful. You want to root for people, but it's hard to see people like experience that level of success and not at least harbor some sense of jealousy.
No, actually, no, not at least not consciously. I no when Matt Groening hit with the Simpsons, it was like, go for it, dude. When Dan Klaus got Ghost World and Art School Confidential, like, this is great. I was good friends with Dave Stevens. How did the hell, now when you think back, how the hell did Disney produce a movie, an indie comic? That was back then. It was just business as usual. Now you think about it, like, wait a minute, Disney said yes to a comic book nobody ever heard of, but Dave and the director Joe Johnston, they just convinced them this is going to work. This is like Indiana Jones, because you have to have the catchwords, Indiana Jones, and it's a little bit of Star Wars in their action and planes and stuff. So they managed to convince them that it was going to be, because Dick Tracy did okay. It wasn't as big as Batman, but it did okay. So they thought, oh, this 30s stuff might work, 1930s stuff. So when I think about it, and I think about Bob Burden's comics, Mystery Men, that was a movie with Ben Stiller. It's like, wait a minute, these got made as movies. The Ninja Turtles, boom, instant hit. But we just didn't have anything to sell. We just didn't have that grabber, like, oh, I get this joke. I get the joke. I get it. There was none of that in it. It's about people talking.
Which I think what did become a phenomenon a bit later with some of the Tarantino Miramax stuff there. So you might have been ahead of your time on that front.
Yeah,
I spoke to somebody about this recently, and I think there is sort of a generational thing, an idea of selling out that doesn't really exist anymore, just because the media landscape has changed so much. But as somebody who grew up in and around the punk scene, the hardcore scene of Southern California, I mean, do you think that there was a little bit of that ethos kind of baked into your philosophy of not wanting to water stuff down or sell out to the man?
Yeah, there was a lot of that because of the material itself. It wasn't just that, I made comics and I didn't want them to mess with it. It was these comics, and I think my brother feels the same way, were ours. They belonged to us. They only existed because we made them, because they're part of who we are. So that's where that came in, as well as the punk ethic. It was like, no, you're not going to change it. It's not made for you to change, because we were going against what we didn't care about, pop culture at the time. Like, hey, there's no. I keep using like Palomar as an example, because it was like there's nothing else like this. You might see a 1950s movie that's like it. You might see something from another time that's similar to it. But at the time, it was just wasn't anything like it, and changing it would just be pointless. Because they've done that a lot. They've taken comic book properties and just changed them completely, and were destroyed. Streaming is different now. They're able to serialize these types of stories, and get a large fan audience.
Frankly, I don't even know how you have a conversation with somebody who asks you where the rockets are. Somebody who is like clearly, because I mean, this is very much a thing in Hollywood. It was, and it probably still is, where they see something has a little bit of countercultural excitement about it, they try to option it, but it's pretty clear when you're talking to somebody who has never opened the front cover of one of your books.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's in the beginning stages, it's fine. The people who come to us to do it, they're enthusiastic, they get it, they want to get it done. But it's going up a ladder of tougher personalities. The higher they are, the more they want to keep that job. Right. So, because they're so well paid. And then the higher you get, that's when you get the older guys that are like, I don't understand. Why would this sell? Tell me, why would this sell? Because, they're about money, and that's business, of course. But I'm like, I don't know how to explain it. I'm not those guys that I'm not Tom Arnold. I can't, weasel my way in, just is able to talk his way into things. That's not me. It's like the material's what it is, and if you guys, because once it's in their hands, when you sign that paper, the visuals, the visual version of it is theirs, meaning they can make any TV or movie they want to, once they want to keep the artist in there just so they could get ideas they don't have to pay for. So a lot of it is simply, it's ours now. We're going to make it better. Because there's always people who want to make it right, but then there's somebody who walks in and goes, I don't like that. Just do it different. So that's just not how it works. For me as an artist to tell these stories. But like I said, now things are different. People are more open-minded. They're more interested in making different types of shows with different colored people.
That's another aspect of that I can't even wrap my head around. Obviously, it was people were, I guess, more openly racist is probably the only way of saying it. How do you respond to a comment like that? I mean, are you able to just answer that straight face? Like, why are there so many Latino people in this?
That's when I just keep my mouth shut. And have a fake smile and stuff, because I'm not going to get anywhere arguing with them. It's just like, oh, okay. You just figure out who's saying it, and you think about that. Okay, this is this person saying it, because not everybody's saying that. It's usually a group of people you're talking to, so it's not just one person saying things you don't want to hear. It's always the one who's got the money. They just. I don't know. It's things are changing though. I see a brighter future for brown people on screen.
When I talk to a person, anyone in alternative indie comics who started reading comics in the 80s and 90s, Love and Rockets is always pointed to as this singular thing. And obviously there were other books that came along. There was Eightball and Hate, but it's a slightly before my time. But from my standpoint, it just seems like it was really kind of the first of its kind in that respect. When did you and your brothers realize that this was something that you could actually do, that there was a path that wasn't a syndicated comic strip or a superhero book?
It was pretty early on, because both their publishers, Gary Groth and Kim Thompson, they were behind it the whole way. They wanted their reasons were a little more selfish. At least Gary's were. They were more about, they were just more about, we're going to crush our enemies. We're going to have a comic that comes out.
It sounds like Gary.
Yeah, but for us it was a good thing, because he was just pigheaded. He goes, no, we're going to get this done. We're going to get noticed. We're going to say this is the comic we're doing. And they were behind us with that, like behind us doing what we wanted to do. And luckily, as our stories progressed, they were fine with that. They thought this is good, and they just liked to have basically literally an alternative scene, alternative comics for somebody who's just out. That's what I used to think: outgrown superhero comics. Like, yeah, you can enjoy them all you want, but after a while, you hit a wall. For me, anyway, just like movies, if I watch, I've got cable, and if they show the Avengers one more time, you can always switch to another movie. There's in comics, you couldn't do that so much at the time. Anyway, early 80s, it was like Marvel, DC, and the sad other companies that were just struggling to survive. And so anyway, so we had like-minded force going toward making our own comic and making our own blip in the world. So, like Chaim and I were just fresh off the punk scene. We're still going to shows. We're still, so, you do have that attitude that, well, we're going to do this anyway. Yeah. Because we had nowhere to fall. Really, it was like, the comic existed or it didn't exist. There's nothing we could do about it if it didn't exist, because there's probably financial factors, keeping it going. But we managed to make it through.
How long into the process of publishing were you when you realized that, hey, we might actually be onto something, that people are actually interested in this thing we're making?
It was a slow roll. It just, people started picking it like around issue 4. Then we went down to the because the first 4 issues were 64-page comic. We couldn't, that was just too much to deal with. So we broke it down to a 32-page comic. And that seemed to, when it started getting noticed. It was because my brother's art, we were still like taking from pulp references just for a gag, just the way early punk did, taking these early trashy references and applying them to comics or music at the time, punk. And it all kind of worked. It was kind of, I don't want to say a joke. Yeah, I guess a joke. So Jaime would have rocket ships and he would have all that stuff, but that was really just a gag. He was really concerned with the characters. And once we found out that the readers were more interested in the characters than all the stylistic, goofy stuff around it, we just focused on that. And so Palomar was really focusing on that. There's surreal elements, there's crazy art in it, but it's not focused on the daring do of superheroes or aliens and that kind of stuff, which is fun to draw, but it gets boring real quick. I'll admit it. gets boring real quick.
Something Jaime told me a few years ago in an interview, and it's one of those things where somebody tells it to you, and it's obvious when you hear it, is that if you're going to sit down and work on a book for a prolonged period of time, you need to make sure that you're drawing something that you want to draw over and over again. And I suspected that was maybe part of what made him draw cars or dinosaurs, is that it was fun to draw. Obviously that people attach themselves to the human interest story, but was there something in your own work that you found that you were putting on paper because it would sustain your interest as an artist?
It's just simply that I could tell, I was challenged myself to tell stories without the crutches of funny science fiction, funny spaceships, ray guns, to tell a compelling story with just people. Of course, it's all drawn differently and the backgrounds are different or whatever. But that was important to me because as a kid, besides when I was a kid, I grew up, watching monster movies. Every monster movie I could watch, I'd watch them all. And then my mom would be watching movies and I would watch, like, it might be a crime movie or something. And I watch, I go, this is like a monster movie, but I kept expecting a monster, but there wasn't any. And I realized, you can tell a story that feels the same way and entertainment-wise, but there's no monster at the end. I should try to make comics like that. They're just about people. It's still creepy and weird, but there's really no monster in it. That's basically where I made that leap. So thinking about it, and just growing up, recognizing what was taken seriously was, films without monsters. Simple as that, real simple logic. I thought, well, the movies without monsters get, awards. They get, even though I look back at it and there's great monster movies that are better than a lot of dramas without them. But that's because there's so many movies. We didn't have that in comics. So, that was time to change in the 80s. So that's why, it's just like the early punk days. It's like Love and Rockets was one thing. 8-Ball was another. Hate was another. Jim Woodring stuff was another. It was just, there were different individuals coming out with these comics, but everybody had drawing chops and writing chops. It wasn't just this fanzine stuff. Everybody had a background to be able to tell these stories with good art and good storytelling. And that's what really kicked things up. Like people with real chops and real interest in making good comics, different types of comics for adults. They started coming out of the woodwork. And that was great. That was a great time.
In hindsight, it was part of what made you trailblaze your own path in the industry. The notion that maybe, making superhero comics or doing a daily strip was sort of kind of alien and unattainable, as these like punk kids from Southern California. Did those seem like unrealistic paths? Because obviously you were interested in both of those, and those are things that you grew up on.
But I grew it. I outgrew it. I mean, I read Spider-Man as a kid. I'm talking about I'm a kid, not a teenager. And that was the Ditko comics. And so they're just burned in my brain as great comics. And I look back at them and they are. It's not like I go back and go, oh, I used to like this. I say that more about lesser Marvel comics that I won't mention because I know people that worked on them. So, but I just didn't have the energy to pursue it. Like I would probably learn to draw a good Spider-Man page and be proud of myself because it was so hard to do and to finish. But I would get bored to do the next. I would get really bored. I'm super selfish. I really want to be in control of what I'm doing. But at the same time, I'm aware that, but you better do something good if you're going to do it. That's always on our mind. We still, even to this day, Jaime and I look at our comics going, we want this next issue to be good. And if it doesn't meet that, we go, well, the next one will be. And the next one we'll just push ourselves to try to be good, do our best. There's never any like, well, this Batman comic's going to sell anyway, whoever does it. So do it, whatever you want. That can be a good thing, but you have to be invested in Batman. I'm a fan of Batman, but I'm not invested in pursuing his adventures.
Is there kind of a healthy competition with your brothers, Jaime specifically, that really pushed you forward as an artist?
Yeah, actually, he tells me it's both. It's both of us. I mean, I'd look at because like when we started Love and Rockets, he was the star instantly. There's complete good reasons for that. He drew so well. And he did pick the cool parts of pop culture, junk culture, like dinosaurs and cavemen and cave women and rockets and all the fun stuff. But then when he started focusing on the punk girls, he thought, well, punk is more interesting because that's real life and nobody knows about it. Because if you all look at comic books about music before, and I'm tooting my horn here, they were terrible. Anytime rock and roll was introduced into comic books, it was like rock and roll on the Brady Bunch or Gilligan's Island. It was like, what's that 7-string guitar he's playing? What is that? They're dressed up as astronauts. What band is this? What? That had nothing to do with music. What bands were like. So we, since being in the punk scene, it's up and close, personal. It's not like going to an arena show, going to see Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and you're like 5 miles away, and they do their, classic thing, and then they go away in the limo, and we go home, $35 poorer, or whatever it was in those days. How much did it cost for me to see Emerson, Lake and Palmer? Well, it wasn't $120. That's for sure back then. Anyway, so having punk in our face and seeing how and then you leave the club and everybody's on the street and that's where the action is and everybody's crazy. It was just we just observed that, and there was so many stories in the early punk shows that we went to. You had so many stories to tell. What was going on, and like I said, you go to see Emerson, Lake and Palmer. There's nothing to tell other than where did you sit? Oh, way back. Did they blow up stuff? Yeah, that's it. Whereas punk was like insane, cops pulling up and, guys, it's just crazy. We would have to find we talked about this a million times. To find the Black Flag concert, we would just look for the helicopters. I'm serious. Like, where's the playing? I don't know.
In Los Angeles, there's helicopters everywhere.
Yeah. This is before there was too many helicopters. Now it's constant, but then it was just, you knew what the helicopters were for. And it was the Black Flag show. Sure enough. Because later on, years later, when, the Robert Blake thing controversy, but his wife getting murdered. Yeah, that we lived down the street from that, from what that happening. So one night I'm talking to somebody on the phone. I can't remember who it was, and I was like, "What the f?" There was so many helicopters. I mean, insane helicopters. And then my wife said on the news, "Oh, they're tracking Robert Blake's house." And I'm like, "Oh, wow, that's why." So it was weird to be just right there. Yeah, a murder, a classic Hollywood murder and all that stuff. It was weird. It was like, whoa.
But if Jaime stuff was sort of grounded in the punk scene, and you were drawn to Palomar, which is like, I mean, it wasn't your reality at the time. It's not the fantasy specifically, but it's not really necessarily a reflection of where you were at the time.
It just, well, like I said, to finish with Jaime, it was just that his great storytelling and artwork was so like just kaboom that people never thought before Love and Rockets, before Jaime's work got out there, that there was like I don't want to say realistic, but representational art in an underground comic. It was always stylized, like Robert Crumb and Gilbert Shelton. S. Clay Wilson. It was stylized cartooning. They were goofing on old style cartooning and just made them as crazy, as wacky as they could, sex and violence. So nobody had seen that with a black and white type comic, because unless this was Conan or some horror comic, Creepy and Eerie or something, that kind of art. Jaime was telling a story about people with that kind of art, and that was a big game changer. It was like, whoa, okay. So basically, Jaime got that attention right away, and it was all deserved. And we basically had the other half of the book to fill in, which I did most of. So I just thought, so I'm free to do what I want. I don't have to worry about getting people's attention. The tension's already there. People are already buying the book. They're ready. So I had 40 pages to do what I wanted to, or whatever it was. And so that's when I dared myself to do Palomar. So if it died after the first issue, so what? It didn't matter, because, I didn't have anywhere to fall. I just have to get a job. But
what was the dare? What was I guess difficult and unrealistic about it for you to do initially?
At the time, in 1982 to 83, it was simply having Latinos in comics and being the good guys. They weren't the villains. They weren't the drug pushers. They were the normal people that we can relate to, but they're completely different culture than what comic book readers are used to. Luckily, I managed to make a story, the first Palomar story, as something that people wanted to come back to. They thought, "Oh, I like this story. This is like it was always compared to a movie. Oh, this is like a movie. Oh, yeah." And I was flattered, sort of. I go, "No, it's a comic book." But anyway, so some people to this day will just say that's the best thing I've ever done, was the first Palomar story, and I accept that as a kindness. That's super nice to say, but it's also like, yeah, but you were 20 and it was the first time you saw it. When you see my comics now, you've seen it all. So it's not, it doesn't have the same impact.
In my own life, I'm trying to get better about just taking the compliment from people and not telling them that thing that they like that I don't necessarily consider to be my best is bad, or that they should feel bad for liking that thing.
Yeah. There's sometimes they come up to me at, like, usually I get the usual, could you sign this, this Love and Rockets, or this, this DC comic you did or whatever, graphic novel. I'm, yeah, okay, yeah, that's great, great, great. And sometimes it'll bring one that I thought nobody liked. And they'll go, this is my favorite comic. And that makes me happy. Like some screwball thing that I just did that nobody liked, or I don't suspect they did because I'm just neurotic.
Is there something that you look at that you feel like was something really great that you did that just didn't get the appreciation that it deserved at the time?
Well, I never think anything I do is great. It was something to work on, something to make better. No, I don't. I guess Palomar is the only one that I'm the most proud of. As in, I did something that was different and new in comics. Really, that's what that was about. Because the other stuff is just my goofy imagination. But like I said, drawing superheroes and monsters and stuff, it's a small window for me. It's not like there's nothing epic in there for me to continue. So I can only do it in short bits. So when I did series and graphic novels with science fiction stuff, it was fun and good, and I'm glad people liked them when they did. But that's not my strength. I've learned that over the years. I like drawing it though, but drawing and writing is two different things in that sense. That I love to draw a science fiction story the way it looks, the way it plays out, the ideas that come with it, but it's not. It doesn't have the weight of Palomar for me. So
where does something like Scarlet fit in there?
That's, like I said, it's a little bit more on the type of comic books I've been talking about, just science fiction, a lengthy Twilight Zone, say. I was just thinking in terms of that, because originally I wanted the character Fritz to be the actress in all these books, the movie books, to be. I said she was a B movie actress right away, so it wouldn't be a shock to see her doing different things like that. Like she's acting as a cat monster in Scarlet, and in Hypnotwist, she's just the classic story of the person waking up and they don't know where they are, and all this mysterious, surreal stuff happens. Those are classics, ideas that have been on the TV shows like The Twilight Zone or The Outer Limits in the old days. That's something I just really liked. Those are really indulgences for me. But no matter how indulgent I get, I want the reader to have something, to read something, have something there to enjoy, whether it's made up stuff or the way I drew something or the way I wrote something or set up a scene. As long as the reader can find entertainment and fun in that, I'm happy, even if it doesn't have the same kind of warmth that the better Palomar stories had. Not all my stories are warm.
S. Clay Wilson died recently, and I was reading, I think it was the Washington Post put together some cartoonist quotes, and you were in there, and he said something along the lines of, I feel like I'm going to hell for reading this or something like that, because this stuff was, as much of the comics were of that era, but in some ways his stuff was kind of above and beyond. And like I was thinking about that. I had read Scarlet in another form early on, and there were definitely beats that jumped out at me because like there's some shocking stuff that happens in Scarlet. I mean, it goes to some pretty dark places.
Well, if to me it was more like I've learned a lot about people's secret fantasies and stuff just by stuff that you would hear about on the internet. See, all this stuff has come out on the internet. You can even as safe as YouTube is, you can stumble upon some crazy ass shit, So that's what I was thinking of. I think like, well, there's guys out there that would like to be with a Catwoman monster if they could. To me, that's creepy and weird and smelly and disgusting. But at the same time, so I try to humanize those stories. I made the cat people sympathetic as much as I could, And so the scientist, he hooks up with her only because he can in this story, in this kind of story. So that's where it becomes a B movie, and but I still insist on making the sad cat lady sympathetic. That's the most important thing to me.
The Twilight Zone comparison makes perfect sense, in a sense. Is there sort of a sense of morality to Scarlet? Is there a lesson there? I mean, if I had to take a shot in the dark, it would be that human beings are capable of some sick shit.
Yeah, some sick shit, and they don't care when they're done with it. See, that was the whole point. Is that at the end, he obviously cares about Scarlet, and the other scientists do too. But then when it's over, it's like, okay, I'll see you later. Sorry you got your head chopped off. I got America to go back to. Just the selfishness and irresponsibility of people. That's a good theme in science fiction.
You just touched on something really interesting, this idea of I've got America to go back to. Is it a story about colonization?
You know what? A lot of those things that I do in my stories, because they're always called out that way. Oh, you did a story about colonization. And I have to like think back like, oh yeah, that's what it was. Because I'm not aware of it as I'm doing the story. It just seems like the right things that would happen as it unfolds to me. That's storytelling is that. And as nutty and, science fiction-y as Scarlet is, it's like I said, the whole point was just to make her sympathetic, even though, really bad things happen. So yeah, I don't know.
As you're saying this idea of going back to America, I'm thinking about colonization. I'm thinking about the way soldiers behave in war. It's like a dramatically compounded version of the way people act when they stay in a hotel room. You do things in a hotel room, even if it's just leaving, towels all over the place that you wouldn't do in your home.
Oh, right.
And this is
and
this is kind of the same case because not to like drill down on it too much, but there's this guy, the scientist who, as you said, makes it with Scarlet, but then it takes an even darker turn from there. Like there's even there's far worse stuff that happens in there, and it's just kind of, I think you just hit on it really well, where it's like there are things that we will do when we're not here that we won't do when we're back in the States or back at home.
I just saw a thing, this short little documentary thing on TV, and it was about how much sexual abuse there is in the military. How many women are sexually abused because there's more of them since Desert Storm. There's more women on the lines, more women out there, but there's more sexual harassment, more violent rapes, just horrible crap. And it's all kept quiet because it's military. We don't talk about that. And it just was really sad to me. It's like, these women go over there thinking they're going to do something. They want to do something. I don't agree with joining the army, but they did. And so, I back them up a little bit. And they just go through so much hell sometimes in some cases. And apparently it's a lot. And that's not news. That's not on the news where, oh, we've got to get rid of this. No, that's just something that I happened to see in a little documentary, So anyway, it's like that. It's like, oh boy, there's all this stuff going on. People are just ready to be evil when the gates are open. There are certain people, not everybody, but certain people who can't wait to be evil. There's a guy that we had trouble with for 4 years, and he's one of those people. But
again, sort of getting back this idea, the S. Clay, your quote about S. Clay Wilson about going to hell, and I suspect a lot of that is sort of informed by having grown up a Catholic and having these pretty like strict structures, but is part of what makes you able to draw some of these darker themes just the knowledge that you're reflecting some actual horrible things that go on in the world.
I started emphasizing that in my my comics, because as a kid, I didn't think of the world that way. It was, matter of fact, monsters and that stuff was an escape and horror, violence and movies and stuff.
It's clear who the monster is and who isn't the monster, right? There's that delineation.
So I drew, I've talked about this before. I used to draw real violent comics when I was, say, from like 4th grade to 6th grade, just because I got a hold of some horror comics that were so violent and ugly in black and white. I was tickled by them. I knew they were awful, but they just cracked me up. I go, well, they're selling this to kids, so it can't be that bad, even though it was. I mean, the stuff you see. And then shortly after that was underground comics. So I always had this creepy feelings of like, this is kind of cool to draw. I want to read this and that's not. But once I became an adult, I saw, that shit really happens to people. The awful part, the violent part, not the monsters, not that, not the violent part. So many people have gone through that and then you start going deeper for centuries, man's inhumanity to man, that kind of thing. And it's like, wow, and I thought, well, so I started, I'll still do it in the fantasy sense, but normally I tried to use super violence as something horrible, because it happens to real people.
I guess I would say spoiler, but I think if people have made it, 53 minutes into this podcast, I'm assuming they probably read the book. It's done in a science fiction way, but there's a depiction of child rape and child murder, like the worst. You'd be hard pressed to think of a worse thing.
Yeah.
Are there places you won't go?
Well, here's the thing. Since it was a science fiction story, and I did want to say serious things within that story, if you'll notice, it's only the monkey people, the cat people that suffer this stuff. They suffer this. I would have a hard time drawing human children in that same way. the way I did, the way I depicted it. So you hide behind the monster aspect of it, even though you're telling something serious. The way old Hollywood did in the old days, you'd have a movie that seems like fluff, but they would have serious themes in there. They can get away with it. So anyway, the stuff that happens to the children, cat children, is so horrible that I could never draw that with humans. I just couldn't do it.
I hate asking such an obvious question, but like I really have to know what the initial germ of that idea is. I read it and I'm thinking of some David Lynch works. I'm thinking of like A Velvet Glove. I think is probably a good comparison to make. It's one of the more surreal things you've done, and there's not a ton of linear narrative. What was the initial idea?
I wanted to do for years. I wanted to do a story without words because words are my crutch. So if I don't have words, I've got to play out the story. Say with words, you could jam so much information in one page. When you don't use the words, you have to pace it out like a silent movie. Each step of what they're doing, to make it flow and make it interesting to read. If I'd want to do that, and I just kept holding off, and then like you said, I'd love the films of David Lynch and oddball surreal films, and I thought that would be a great thing to do because it's really a classic story. Person wakes up in a new world. They don't know how they got there. And that's there's an old movie. Probably the strongest influence was a movie from the early '50s called Dementia, or the re-released version of it's called Daughter of Horror, and it's basically a woman wakes up in a tattered hotel room and then goes out and has all these scary, creepy, surreal adventures. And then at the end, she spoiler alert. And then at the end, she realized it's all a dream. She just wakes up, and it happens again. We've seen that so many times. So I want to do something like that. Just use my imagination instead of my usual way of writing, which is words. And I don't know. It's just a challenge. It was a challenge to make it entertaining.
The movie that it's loosely based on or that inspired it, there is kind of a happy ending, and that she goes through some terrible stuff. None of it actually happened. She goes through some pretty rough stuff here too, and comes through at the other side. Do you think the fact that it is a character that you've invested so much in and that you do have an emotional connection to, that you had to give her a happy ending?
No, it was just to. Yeah, you know what? I guess so. Yeah, I didn't think of that because sometimes I'll give her a terrible ending and sometimes I'll give her a happy ending. And that happened to be, I go, well, since it's this movie, the story is creepy and weird, contradict it with a happy ending, instead of a worse ending than what she's experienced, Because it's like, say, and Scarlet's different because you don't really see the doom that happens at the end of the story while you're reading it. You see trouble, a lot of trouble, but not the hellish doom that it ends up. So that's the opposite, it's like, oh, Scarlet's a really nice animal. She's really super nice. What happens to nice people? Yes.
One of the things that strikes me about Hypnotwist is something that I've noticed in some of your work. And I've always been curious how conscious this is. It seems like a lot of your work almost operates in dream time, if that makes sense, that you have a unique pacing. A lot of times it'll be more straightforward in the more narrative stuff, but it seems to sort of operate in a different time than reality. Is that something that you're conscious of when you're doing that work?
Yeah, I'm conscious of. I want it to be a dream. Basically, okay, this it's real simple. I look at the story like that, and I go, okay, it's a dream because my some of my fondest memories growing up as a small child was having cool dreams. I used to have cool dreams, and mysterious dreams, and I didn't know what they meant, and this and that. And now, as an adult, since I've been doing comics for almost 40 years, I don't dream like I used to. Because during the day, this is what I understand. During the day, most people who have normal lives, regular jobs, they dream a lot because they're stuck in these jobs that, don't require imagination, let's say. Whereas an artist sometimes will do all this stuff, like, say, a cartoonist like me, will just do all his imagination constantly during the day. And so you just sleep through the night and don't come up with the dreams or don't remember them. Because they're not as, even though I do have one interesting dreams once in a while, when I was a kid, they were amazing. And that's what I'm basing this on. I just, the wonder of them. I have had my nightmares, but the wonder of those cool dreams, I just try to put them in my comics.
It doubly jumps out at me because it's a wordless comic. The dialogue is what often keeps us in the time of comics, right? Your brain can process how to read them, but you take that out and you add the surreal element. And it does feel like it feels like a different kind of pacing. Sort of speaking abstractly, but does that make sense? That it just, the amount of time from panel to panel and the way things flow is different than it would be in a more narrative story.
Sure. It goes back to, like I said, movies. Like an old 40s movie where the dialogue is really snappy and going back and forth. You can compress time that way because the words will make it move faster. Just what they say. Whereas the Hypnotwist is basically a silent movie. You have to see everything they're doing. What makes the early Chaplin movies and Buster Keaton in particular so wonderful to watch is you're just seeing everything happening. So these guys have to be good enough to keep you entertained. A lot of movies, when they get arty in the 50s, European movies, you would have people doing nothing, and it was boring. But it was new, so it was taken seriously. Now I look at some of those movies. I saw a couple of movies because my daughter and I watch a lot of different kinds of movies together, and she'll pick one that's a classic 50s movie from France or something. And normally I would say, oh, okay, I guess what there were, but they're of their time sometimes. They're just boring. They're just boring, and I'm not interested in these rich people being sad that, that they're rich. That kind of thing. After a while, you start to think, well, that one didn't work for me. It might have when I was young and learning about films, but now I'm a jaded old man. I didn't mean to pick on the Avengers. I actually like that movie.
We've all got superhero burnout to some degree. There was just so much of it compressed in such a short.
Well, after Captain Marvel, I think I'm done, and not because it's a woman superhero, but it's because now we're coming to names that have already been around. Captain Marvel is a classic 1940s comic, a great one that's one of the great superhero comics. And now you have, Marvel buys the name and says, well, now we have a new Captain Marvel. That doesn't work for me. They could have called her Solaris or something. I don't know. Just can't get past the name.
Do you get the sense that Love and Rockets is going to stick around in some form for as long as the two of you are still able to put ink to paper?
Yeah, pretty much. I can't imagine life without it anymore. And luckily, I only have 16 pages an issue. When there's too much, you can get burnout. You can get that. I don't want to do this anymore. But if you focus on this is only 16 pages, dude. Don't be a wuss. You can get this out. And even though I'm having some trouble finishing this last issue because of writer's block, it's still only 16 pages, so I can get through it. But I can still express myself there. If I have new feelings about something, if my life changes, that can go in there. It's not like it's going to lose readers like, say, a comic strip like Peanuts. If Charles Schulz did any changes to it that the readers didn't expect or didn't want, he would have had some trouble with it, with the Syndicate and all that stuff. But Love and Rockets is completely free of it.
After, I guess, almost 40 years, people trust you. People trust you to go along the journey with you.
Yeah. You never know. Yeah, to a point. Yeah, as long as I make enough of the characters to follow and relate to, I think it's a little safe that way. Even though I don't do that all the time. I'm always drawing really unpleasant things, just because, like I said, it's my monster movie background.